Ce qu'on a souhaité faire dans cette conférence, pour se placer donc après la publication du 5e rapport du GIEC et 5 mois avant la conférence climat, ça a été de considérer qu'on faisait, et c'était notre projet, vraiment une conférence de scientifiques qui parle aux scientifiques, mais pas que.
Nous voulions montrer la complexité des enjeux, la diversité des solutions et amener, disons, l'ensemble des parties prenantes et des négociateurs à réaliser l'ampleur des questions liées au changement climatique.
On souhaitait traiter des problématiques du changement climatique, mais en lien avec d'autres grands enjeux, comme la biodiversité, les ressources en eau, la sécurité alimentaire, la pauvreté, l'équité, le développement humain. Et tout cela a fait que nous avons encouragé très fortement la transversalité et cherché à tirer un peu les chercheurs de leur habitus traditionnel pour les amener à avoir une réflexion et une conversation plus large.
Nous avons pu rapprocher tous les secteurs, à la fois au plan des impacts du changement climatique et puis au plan des adaptations à trouver, des solutions pour réduire les émissions de gaz à effet de serre et donc comment on peut relier toutes ces dimensions dans un pas de temps qui est assez court puisque nous avons seulement quelques décennies pour entreprendre une grande transition.
Très rapidement, le changement climatique est devenu mesurable, perceptible, observable et ça c'est un changement absolument majeur pour tous. Et là, la question se pose vraiment de l'action.
C'est au pays de s'engager, c'est à l'ensemble des acteurs de s'engager, mais nous pouvons éclairer ces décisions, nous pouvons accompagner cette compréhension qui est indispensable pour tous les citoyens afin qu'ils puissent s'orienter dans leurs choix personnels, qu'ils puissent changer de comportement en fonction des menaces qui existent et en fonction des opportunités qu'il faut saisir dans ce contexte nouveau.
When you look at the diversity of ideas, it's important to appreciate the richness and to appreciate that you're really seeing the core of the science process, the bubbling of the creativity and the opportunity.
The conference was also very successful in identifying the new frontiers for the future research agenda.
Climate science has never been more relevant as it is today, and it has already answered big questions, and certainly now it's embarking on new grand challenges. And there are many pieces of knowledge that need some improvement in the future, but certainly there are some pieces of knowledge that matter much more than others, or very much, because they connect to so many different other pieces of our knowledge. And certainly understanding how the atmospheric and oceanic circulations behave, how they vary, how they can respond to anthropogenic perturbations, is certainly a clue for the success of all the grand challenges we have.
We need to embrace the possibility that in a 5-degree warmer world, which is basically what we're heading to under business as usual, we are reorganizing the climate system.
Climate change is a threat to sustainable development. I would argue that addressing climate change and the climate change issue will already bring us on a good path of almost half of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Not addressing climate change will actually make it impossible for many of these targets and goals to be reached.
The groups are changing at different rates. So amphibians are advancing their breeding at the fastest rate, 8 days per decade. Birds and butterflies are advancing faster than our plants. And remember that many butterflies eat plants as their host. And in the marine systems, we see something similar. Predators are advancing faster than are their prey. So we're seeing suggestions that species that normally are interacting may be getting increasingly out of sync. So the moral of all of this is that our previous analyses that have been very simple ones in general are likely to have underestimated the proportion of species that actually have been impacted by recent anthropogenic climate change.
A lot of the talk has been about our common future and mostly thinking about our, meaning people. At least from my perspective, we share this Earth with a lot of other species, and our common future as we go through the next few days, we probably ought to thinking about not just people's common future, but our common future with the species that are on Earth as well.
Ce que cette conférence a, je crois, bien illustré, mais qu'elle a aussi contribué à créer, c'est des rencontres entre communautés de recherche, à la fois entre sciences sociales et d'autres disciplines qui sont plus habituellement mobilisées dans la discussion sur les solutions ou sur le problème climatique. Et là, on a eu plein de sessions qu'on a créées à la faveur de cette conférence, parfois de manière un peu forcée, parfois de manière très spontanée, où différentes postures plus ou moins neutres ou plus ou moins engagées vis-à-vis de la capacité à trouver des solutions ont réussi à dialoguer ensemble et à confronter aussi la manière dont leurs postures respectives étaient toutes acceptables et toutes nécessaires pour trouver une solution au problème climatique.
For complex problems, building the capacity for collective action has to be a multifaceted exercise, engaging both knowledge and politics. It should be multidisciplinary in the best sense, drawing on history, moral philosophy, political theory, and social studies of science and technology, in addition to the sciences as conventionally understood. The reason is not simply to aggregate facts from many sources, but to allow divergent positions and viewpoints to illuminate each other's limitations. The challenge for tomorrow is to reintegrate the science of the state we're in with a more inclusive debate on where we should be going as a global community. This is not a task for the sciences alone, but for politics, ethics, and activism animated by a more enlightened view of the limits of what we know and a more humble approach to what is possible given those gaps and omissions in knowledge.
We have to invent something in Paris that put on the same level the agreement between governments, the engagement of local authorities, the engagement of businesses, this communication for the financial sector, the encyclical, as well as other religious movement commitments or messages, together with the NGOs and the surveillance of the civil society. If we succeed in doing that, then the discussion on treaties, in particular this one, which is so cross-cutting, will be totally different.
When we get to the stage of implementing solutions, some of the solutions discussed at Our Common Future Under Climate Change will be ready to go and become part of the mainstream. Others won't, but they'll all work together to enrich the set of possibilities and provide what you can think of as an extensive menu of carefully thought through options that society can pick from and assemble the set that works the best for them.
One of the patterns that the conference highlighted and came through very forcefully was the role and the extent of what we called co-benefits, that is, areas where development and broader policy gains run in parallel with climate mitigation and adaptation. So the more you see these co-benefits, the more there's a synergy between development policy and climate policy.
Why is climate change so seldom described as a health issue?
Now, in future, the worst that could happen would be levels of heat and humidity that exceed the human body's limits, upper limits of tolerance. That is to say, climatic conditions would be fatal. Such conditions could cause fatalities on a huge scale.
In order to stay below 2 or even 3 degrees centigrade, we need to have something really disruptive happening over the next 2 or 3 decades. And this is more or less, I would call it something like the induced implosion of the carbon economy over the next 20 or 30 years, the induced implosion of that economy. Otherwise, we have not the slightest chance of avoiding dangerous, maybe disastrous climate change.
If we used the opportunity to retrofit the global economy to face the challenge of climate change, it would stimulate the economy, it would improve economic growth, and it would obviously increase employment. And at the same time, in doing so, we would have helped address one of the other major challenges of our time, increasing inequality.
How can one trigger a politically acceptable transition? This, again, it's just a tale, suggests that this is feasible. Basically, you need to embed that into a discussion about your social contract. That includes the sectoral policies, which we have seen, the experience in France shows by themselves are not easy to pass. Labor markets and labor regulations, so this is the negotiation between labor negotiations and financial intermediation.
You can have technology, you can have society buy in, but the glue that makes the whole thing work is finance. So the challenge is for treasuries to recalibrate where they want to go. If we want to save the world, 2 degrees world, we don't have time. And $10 billion in a Green Climate Fund sounds like a lot, but it isn't.
Science research gets done in the north and then gets transferred to the south. The rich countries do the research, they come up with the technologies. This is very true for mitigation technologies, and then those need to be transferred to the developing countries. It's a technology transfer north to south. I would argue that when it comes to adaptation, that is not the only dimension, and indeed, in fact, the reverse may be the case. As of now, the 48 least developed countries in the world, the poorest countries in the world, have done more planning and are doing more implementation and going up the learning curve of how to do adaptation faster than any developed country.
The challenges, though, are very much social. It's really about communicating with people, communicating the message of the science to policymakers and also to citizens and stakeholders.
If you want to have sustainability in managing risk, integration is a key important element in the process, where many stakeholders talk to each other, many policymakers and government departments have to talk together. The water department does not necessarily talk with the forest department does not necessarily talk with the agriculture department.
Normally we say that the technology innovation is important for mitigations. But I want to say this is important, but not enough. We should pay more attention to social innovation. If we use my own cars for mobility, this is technology innovation, which is energy efficient. But if instead we use the car sharing system for mobility, this is social innovation. In some degrees, social innovation is much better than technology innovation.
You also need social movement pressure, otherwise politicians are not going to move, but you also need a wider range of NGOs. And you probably need to engage citizens, give them a broader role and voice in this transition, because otherwise this is going to run out of steam.
We allow resilience to become the paradigm in political practice. We don't want a resilient global future. What we want is to avoid it. In political practice, in the present moment, I'm preparing for COP21, we don't want resilience, we want resistance to climate change.
We really have a window of opportunity now, and a window that's rapidly closing, where the solutions are economically attractive and societally available. If we wait, solutions are still available, but they get to be more complicated, more expensive, and they leave residual impacts.
Il faut changer un peu les institutions, en tout cas créer peut-être des espaces particuliers où la communauté scientifique doit de toute façon faire son travail comme d'habitude, mais où les scientifiques s'engagent dans une discussion plus opérationnelle avec les politiques.
Je
crois que ce que peut faire la science, c'est trier dans toutes ces idées, dans toutes ces technologies, et offrir une sorte de guide qui n'est pas à suivre de manière littérale par le monde politique, mais qui peut l'aider beaucoup dans sa perception. La communauté scientifique sera au rendez-vous s'il s'agit d'aider à mesurer les conséquences d'un accord, la manière dont l'accord est appliqué, la manière dont un accord peut être renouvelé, renforcé dans le futur. Donc cette recherche de solutions, elle implique de savoir définir des objectifs, de savoir définir aussi des échelles de temps, enfin des agendas pour ces objectifs. C'est un chantier très large qui va nous occuper dans les années qui viennent. C'est aussi un chantier urgent parce qu'on voit que si la COP21 donne les résultats qu'on espère, on aura besoin de cette expertise dans les étapes qui suivront très vite maintenant.
Reading from the statement, science is a foundation for smart decisions at COP21 and beyond. Solving the challenge of climate change requires ambition, dedication, and leadership from governments, the private sector, and civil society, in addition to the scientific community. We in the scientific community are thoroughly committed to understanding all dimensions of the challenge, aligning the research agenda with options for solutions, informing the public, and supporting the policy process. But undertaking the challenge represents opportunities as well as challenges. And these are the opportunities of our common future. Thanks.